welcome to That Church Tech Guy. We're in a series called The Basics of Church Sound, and we are learning part 3 of that series, The Basics of Compression. So we're going to jump right in. A lot of us have had times where a lead vocalist is leading a song, and on the verse it's just so quiet on the verse, and then the chorus they're just belting it. It's so loud, and you're just constantly moving the fader back and forth, and you don't have any consistency in your volume. Same thing with the speaker. That is where compression comes in and will help you a ton, especially if you're a beginner or if you have beginning sound guys that don't really know how to ride a fader. There's really 2 ways that people compress and mix. One way is to compress less and ride the faders more. This will get you a little more of a less compressed sound. Compressing less and riding the faders more just simply means you're not compressing as much, which we'll get into, and you're mixing more live. So that low point in a verse, you're boosting that vocal up. The high parts in the chorus, you're bringing that vocal back down to make it fit in well, but still that you can hear it. And you're just riding the fader and constantly listening and evolving and changing your mix with the music. It's a very musical way of mixing. It's also very challenging, and there's a lot that can be going on if you have 3, 4, 5 vocalists, and you have it can be hard. You can lose stuff in the mix when you're not paying attention. You're focused on certain things. So that is one way that you can mix. It's fun. It's good to do that. And then a second way, especially that is better for beginners, is just using compression on a lot of your channels and compressing more so that volume can be set to a level and stays there. So compression is you're compressing the signal, and you're taking the peaks, the highest points of the signal, and you're smushing them down. You're smushing the volume down so that the volume is more consistent and contained and compressed. Without further ado, we will get into the compressor. So on this X32, it is called your dynamic section. You can get to this by clicking the view button here, and you get a nice visual of your compression. All right, so what parameters do you have in a compressor? You have threshold, which this is the point at which your compressor will kick in. That's where this threshold is. A lower threshold, lower in the negatives, means you're compressing more. And you're compressing the signal earlier on at a lower point. Your ratio is the next important one, and this is the ratio at which you are compressing after that threshold. So anything above 30 dB is going to be compressed at a ratio of 2.5 dB per 1 dB. The more ratio you have, the more you are compressing. So this is something that a higher ratio will compress more naturally. Anything above like 7 is really dramatic, and it's just gonna crush the sound. It's gonna lose a lot of its dynamics, which low and high points that are natural in voice and song. I've never used a ratio above 5 in my mixing, and rarely even above 4. But having a higher ratio is going to give you a more consistent signal. So threshold and ratio, that's what you're going to want to play with the most. Now, a very important thing with compression is gain. This is the far right knob when you pull up the compressor view. When you compress a signal, you are lowering the gain of that, so you need to make that up somehow. Otherwise, you're going to be way too high on the fader, not getting enough signal. That's where this post-compress gain is going to help you a ton. Normally, you want to look in your live compressor here. You can see how much you are pulling out. Sometimes it's at like -4, but it's hanging around -2. So then I really only need like 2 dB of gain to make that up. This is called makeup gain in a lot of compressor plugins and other DAWs, because you're essentially making up the gain that you're compressing. Because as we learned in gain staging, you want to make sure you have the same gain before and after an effect so that you can accurately hear what you're doing, and you can accurately, you're getting the right gain to the fader. When you're starting out, don't worry too much about attack, hold, and release. These are things that you can look up and you can learn about, but now we're going into uses of compression. There's a lot of sources you might not need to compress. So pretty much to start out with setting a compressor, reviewing the compressor, it's active. Basically what you want to do is find that point at which the voice is kind of living which I did earlier by just getting a threshold. And this is depending on how much compression you want to do. So say we want to do more compression and ride the faders less, so we have a more consistent volume for all of our vocalists. I'm going to pull this threshold down. I'm going to keep this at 3. I might go to 4 if it's getting really loud at some points, but we're already doing a lot of compression here. We're getting like into -10 on my high points when I'm talking. So I might stick to 3 here, and I'm getting like -6, -8. And this is going to even out my sound. And we have to make sure that we're not taking too much out, and remember, we need to give some gain back. So since we're hitting around -6 consistently, we need to give about 6 dB of gain back so that we can still have good enough range of motion on this fader that we can affect the signal. So that's how you kind of set the compressor. You can play with this, move it up, move it down, and move it back. You can bring the threshold up and the ratio up. Just play with different settings and see what's happening with your vocalist. I would say start out with the 3 ratio, pull the threshold down until you're seeing some gain reduction. It's going to help your mixes a ton. It's going to help the points where someone's really loud, it's going to compress more. The points where people are quiet, it's going to be boosting because it's compressing just a little bit, but it's still keeping it kind of the same. You're not going to have to be riding the faders as much. So that is the basic of compression. There is a ton more advanced techniques that maybe there will be videos on in the future. If you have any requests, I wish I had time to share more. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys to learn some basics of the parameters and how to use a compressor. Compression can be huge. It can make your mixing so much easier and can solve a lot of problems. So I hope you got something practical out of that you can use this Sunday at your church. And please comment if you have any more questions or any ideas for future videos. Thanks again to Journey Arts Collective and Journey Church for allowing me to use this X32, and we all just want to make what we do better. So I hope this helped, and without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.